Welcome to Impactful. Today we will talk about AI, digital security, and the protection of journalists and human rights defenders. Our guest is Elodie Vialle, a journalist and tech policy advocate. Welcome, Elodie.
Thanks so much for having me.
How did you become interested in connecting journalism, technology, and human rights?
I used to be an editor-in-chief of an online media dedicated to social innovation, a radio columnist at French radio France Inter, and a TV journalist. And then I worked as a consultant for Newsroom internationally to advise them on their editorial and digital strategy. And, to some points, I wondered, what's the point of chasing the next digital innovation, trying to implement them within the media industry, if people are not even free to express themselves in many different countries? And so this is why I decided to focus on defending press freedom, working on human rights. And back to 2017, I joined Reporters Without Borders. At that time, I was the head of the tech desk. So my role was to identify violation of freedom of information online and to try to create solutions and develop solutions. So at that time, I started working on online harassment of journalists. I noticed that a lot of journalists reach out, and actually from many different countries and covering many different contexts, topics, but the problem was the same. They faced massive intimidation, insult, disinformation. Actually, online harassment of journalists is a tactic of disinformation. It's part of information operation, as we say. And so I started building the field literally on this topic, developing research, monitoring the situation internationally, working on solution. And then I worked in the US because I had identified the work made by PEN America on online abuse. They have developed the most complete, I would say, one of the most complete resource for journalists. And so I join them to help them to adapt also these resources for many different contexts and engage internationally. So I've developed an international and holistic approach of online harassment of journalists, developing research for the platforms, for the tech industry, developing programs for journalists, for Newsroom as well. I advise several newsrooms, particularly in my country, France. And I've developed also tech advocacy. So now I do work in Brussels, for instance, on the Digital Services Act enforcement, in Geneva more recently, to better amplify the voice of journalists, human rights defenders, and marginalized communities who are attacked online. So that's really my goal, to connect the dots between journalism, human rights, and technology.
What challenges do journalists most commonly face today regarding digital security?
Internationally, we observe a rise of digital authoritarianism. There's a connection between the attacks against democracies, democratic processes, and the rise of digital tools to attack these democracies. And so journalists are at the front line. So they face surveillance, and all the scandals regarding Pegasus, for instance, are just an example among many. And so they are also, because I monitor a lot what happens on social media, I know that they face a lot of hacking attempts. Even recently, a lot of cases in Europe on scams of account of journalists, because actually they have a lot of followers. And we have a lot of concern also within civil society organizations and associations of journalists about doxing Doxing, this is when people try to find personal information on you online and to use it to discredit you. So maybe you can get one picture of you or something you did when you were as a student, and it's like nothing, but just collecting all this information together and then share widely to a cohort of abusive trolls, this kind of message with bad narratives. This is just an operation orchestrated, and the goal is really to discredit the journalist. And so this is what we call doxing. And this is a big threat for journalists online. What is very unfair is that also it's women journalists are way more targeted, marginalized communities of journalists. And it's important to deal with that, not only because, okay, it's helpful for these folks, but also because it's a direct threat to freedom of expression. It's a direct threat to press freedom, and it's a direct threat to democratic processes.
How does AI affect the safety of journalists and human rights defenders?
For me, AI is just a new iteration of what I've been working on over the last few years. And what we observe is that it has never been so easy to create a fake content, audio, video, text, a whole story, a whole narrative to discredit a journalist. And we observe in many cases that this narrative, this rise of gender-based disinformation online is just a new repent within all the disinformation thing, you know. For instance, a few months ago, ahead of the Slovakian parliamentary election, a journalist, Monika Todova, was harassed online. A fake video was produced and to create a false situation between her and a politician, a false conversation. And even if the video was totally false, it reached thousands of users on social media. And so in this example that has been monitored and documented by civil society organizations, we can see that the reputation of the journalist is discredited as part of a global disinformation campaign aimed at undermining the democratic processes. And this is why the use of AI, it's a big concern for us. But at the same time, we're also exploring opportunities to better protect journalists online. What about chatbot that can be used to provide some support for journalists, because we cannot always duplicate ourselves to assist them? What about also using AI to better detect, monitor inauthentic coordinated behaviors, disinformation campaigns, and to better understand also who is behind all these attacks? And this is a lot of journalists and nonprofit organizations supporting journalists are also working on exploring these opportunities right now.
What are the most important steps journalists can take to protect themselves online?
First, you need a plan, you know, when you're online. And, you know, it's helpful not only for journalists and human rights defenders, but also for all users when you're online. And how do you build a plan? Then first you do a risk assessment. Who is your potential adversary? I mean, who could try to attack you online or try to undermine your reputation online? It can be potentially anybody, you know? So you have to understand to create some kind of personas. Okay, my adversary could be this person, this political group, and so on. You have to understand then what can they do? What is their power? It's not the same thing to be attacked by a random person, even if I acknowledge that one single person one stalker can be very harmful online, and to be attacked by a political group, private company, a state, you know? So you have to understand their power and then what they want to do. Do they want to damage your reputation? Do they want to censor your next report, and what are they going to try to do exactly? Are they going to try to hack your account? Are they going to report your account on social media as spam so that the account is blocked and you don't even have access to your own social media account? Are they going to try to launch hashtag against you to discredit you? And then you have to understand how you can prevent them from doing this, or how you can exactly, if I want to say precisely, mitigate the impact of what they do. Because let's be honest, we cannot do miracles. When people know that I work on this kind of thing, they say, can you stop online harassment? I say, yes, no, it's not possible, but what we can do is that we can make sure that the work of your adversary is going to be more difficult than what they think, we can make this work a little bit more complicated. And so that's why then we work on with journalists. We have digital safety trainings. We work on password, making password more stronger, unique, what is personal, what is professional online. Because people outside of the journalistic community, they don't necessarily get that we need to use social media to do our work as journalists. It's not possible. We're not online just for connecting with friends and so on. We cannot remove ourselves from social media. And so that's why it's a professional tool. And this is also this perspective that I share with social media platforms when I engage with them to support journalists as users of these platforms.
What advice do you have for journalists regarding digital security?
This is the focus of my work is on it. Just first, as a journalist, you might want to go now on all your social media platforms account and put the two-factor authentication, a stronger way to secure your account online. Because if you don't do it, the risk of being hacked is way more higher. And secondly, really work on password. Recently, I discussed with a journalist, and the situation was really helpful for this person. And actually, she was like, "Oh my God, I should have worked on my password and post one password per platforms, per websites. I knew I had to do it. I didn't because, life." And yeah, it's better to do it before the attack, So that's my just takeaway also for journalists and every users watching this video. But with social media platforms, actually, they can do a lot to better protect journalists, human rights defenders, and all at-risk users, let's say, users who are more likely to be targeted by online attacks. PEN America, which is a nonprofit organization supporting writers, journalists, and artists in the US and in the world, has published several reports with very concrete recommendations for social media platforms on what they can implement right now to better protect their users. So I worked on one of these reports called No Excuse for Abuse, what social media platforms can do now to protect and empower their users. And we have very concrete and simple recommendations, such as revamping the reporting feature. Today, it's very complicated if you face abuse online to just report to the media platforms. And then you cannot get a simple dashboard where you see all the reports you sent. So there's no documenting tool. You cannot delegate access. For instance, if you're in the midst of an attack, you might want to delegate access to ask your friend to support you in the attack without giving them all the keys of your account, And so we did this work based on interviewing the communities of users, interviewing journalists, and we've had these discussions with platforms. But this is really the kind of thing they can implement now. And this is also, these features are now requirements under the DSA, the Digital Services Act within the European Union. Platforms, they need to do a risk assessment. They need to build a crisis mechanism. They need to do due diligence to better understand the needs and risk of their users online. And one big also project I've been working on over the last few years is to build escalation channels with social media platforms for civil society organizations protecting vulnerable users. Basically, we need someone to answer when there's an attack, because in many different contexts, we documented cases where someone was killed because online hate on social media. And we needed some content to be, the reach of the content to be decreased or to better understand the attack. We just needed to communicate with the platforms. But this communication was difficult, or I would say impossible in some cases and in some countries. And so it's very harmful. So now within the European Union, social media platforms, very large online media platforms, they got the obligation to create this point of contact. They have the obligation to create these crisis protocols. And this is something that is very important for civil society organization. I'm part of the Coalition Against Online Violence, gathering over 80 nonprofit organizations. And the escalation channel recommendation is one of the big projects of the coalition to better support users online.
What are the key obstacles you face in your work?
Yeah, I face a lot of obstacles. Let me tell you, in my work, I would say this is a bit my daily routine. So we have we face obstacles when we talk with social media platforms to ask them to do something. We face obstacles because they don't have incentives to do that, you know? So that's why we also talk with regulators and investors and different kind of stakeholders. And when I work with journalists and media organization, I also face obstacles because they know there's a problem. They see now that this is a big problem, but they face so many challenges, you know, in many different contexts. They face legal threats, potential arrests, potential physical attacks. And so online harassment is just an additional layer of problems. But actually, this is just an aspect of this whole problem, right? Again, and of these violations against press freedom. So the journalists also, they are, a lot of work is being done currently on this topic, but a lot of journalists are actually traumatized now and want to stop doing journalism because all this pressure, economical pressure, political pressure, this hate against journalists. And so it's very difficult when people understand there's a problem. Most of the time they're traumatized, which is not that easy. And so that's why we have, when I said I work using a holistic approach, it includes psychological approach. And organizations don't necessarily have sometimes the bandwidth also. So that's why we really try to work, and I try to work with them on implementing solutions that don't add an additional layer of cost for them. So you see, there's a lot of obstacles, and but this is definitely a direct threat to press freedom and democracy. So that's why we need to put some efforts into tackling this issue.
How can social media platforms improve to better protect journalists and human rights defenders, and what we can do as a first step?
I think it's very important to include civil society organizations within these discussions and regulation. There's a race currently towards the AI standards. Great, but principles and standards are great. What's worth is enforcement, you know? And this enforcement relies on civil society organization. How do we involve communities of users within the data pipeline? Just saying that, oh yeah, we're going to work with civil society organization, we're going to work with communities to, I don't know, label data sets, you know, to get an editorial human reviewing and so on. Great. With which money? Because so far I'm observing the field. I see the the tech industry, vendors who sell content moderation solutions. The communities of users and at-risk users are not involved. Journalists, I represent journalists, human rights defenders, but I'm talking about all the communities of users. They are not involved in these efforts. And it's not transparent. And everybody agrees on saying that what works is the data sets and how it's going to be labeled and everything, but how the communities of users are involved in these efforts and who's going to pay for that? Because as civil society, we're always keen on being vocal on these issues, but it's working at scale on this. Who's going to pay for that? We have to think about, I would say, financial models for these things as well. So I don't know if it's a recommendation for lawmakers, policymakers, but think about when you say, oh, we're going to work, we do that for civil society, we're going to work with civil society. Okay, but if there's no resources, it's just words, So, yeah, that's it.
That was the last question for today. Thank you, Elodie.
Thank you.
You watched another episode of Impactful. Thank you, and see you next week.